people per year in this
Said like
animation
200
school.
people applied and it's like 18 or something.
18, 16 or 18, something like that.
When did he finish?
Just finished. Just finished.
And LA is a good place. Working commercially is a good place to start. Working commercially.
I think he wants to be famous. That's right, yes.
When did my sister tell me that boy?
Yeah, she also undergrad Yale University private campus, but she
What do you want to do?
well, she's great with music. She's also got 10 years school academy, very high, grade, competed and in the state of California. She provided license. But this wasn't before she went to college. Then she went to Stanford. After 2 years, she said, I want to do culture. Transferred to Yale, graduated Yale, private campus, and decided that she didn't want to go to engineering. She said, well, I don't want to go to just law school. I want to go to the place that is very creative. Like I can make some products. So she created another visual, very interesting program, visual screen that would recognize people who don't come and share the screen, and then definitely depends on
As
visualization.
well as psychology.
And
Get
then,
her email. Because I always
that's what she is definitely, maybe not that well, but she can understand, how to work together. She's already shown all the screens
are implicitly artistic.
She's done a
And then she was done it for actually for Wallenstein. And you know how Stanford is, and we know him very well, David Kelly's idea. When he spent time with school, did you know David? Did you hear about idea?
It's a company in
Yes.
I'm not moving.
Yeah. But he's considered to be the designer in the world. And he's a designer. Yeah. When his photographer, he said, go and do this program because the artist is a technical profile. Because she graduated on the highest in physics, highest in math, but at the same time very artistic. I will explain because she is not.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Talks program. My name is Alf Seckham. I'm the Director of Programming for the Palo Alto International Film Festival, and I program a lot of the talks. But I also have a lot of help from partners like Variety. And Andrew Wallenstein today is the TV editor for Variety. He's going to moderate this panel. And I just want to first thank him for helping us out, and thank Alan for coming. And I'll just let you take it from here.
Sure.
Oh, actually, you're covered.
Oh, that's right. I don't need a microphone. Thank you. Well, first let me introduce our guest. You know, here we are obviously at a festival that is both film and in the interactive space. Well, I could tell you that in these past few years, you cannot talk about original programming on digital platforms without talking about what this guy is doing. His name is Alan DeBevoise, CEO of Machinima.com, which is really inarguably the leader right now in terms of programming for these platforms. Quick show of hands, though, because I want to make sure we understand our audience here. How many of you have seen content on Machinima.com? Okay, so we're not going to get too 101 on you, but I do want you to start, Alan, by giving sort of the overview of when your brand started and what kind of programming is out there, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks very much for coming today. So Machinima comes from the words machine cinema, which was the idea that there was content being created out of real-time game engines. Some people talk about it as filmmaking in virtual reality. And so the early part of the movement was people making content, literally shows like Red versus Blue, or you may have seen the South Park guys in 2007 won an Emmy, in fact, for an episode called Make Love Not Warcraft, which was done in World of Warcraft Machinima, and it's actually you can see it on iTunes or Xbox. Gives you an idea of what really that forum was like. But over time, we've evolved to mean really content that's really rooted in gaming. So a lot of it can be gameplay and can be shows about gaming. And even recently, we've done live action shows based on Mortal Kombat. We have a big Halo live action series coming out next week. And we've grown enormously. We reach about 200 million people per month, and we deliver about 2.2 billion video views per month, all on YouTube.
Yeah, that's pretty tremendous. I mean, you just mentioned this Halo thing. I mean, would you say to date this is kind of the biggest programming effort you've done? Why don't you talk a bit about what that is?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of different genres of programming. Some of it is, as I said, it goes everywhere from kind of gameplay to live action, episodic narrative. And I think Halo is, from what we understand, this series that's coming out next week, the most ambitious kind of episodic narrative live action show done for the web. And it's really great. We've seen lots of it so far, and we're really excited about what's going to happen next week.
Let's also give them an understanding of the business of what you do. I mean, I think the knock against programming for digital platforms is it's not nearly as lucrative a business as, say, programming for TV or obviously for film. Advertising rates aren't quite what they are when they're relative to television. So how do you make it work?
Well, it's interesting because it's a business that's sort of in the middle, especially ours, that's somewhere between. People talk about it being disruptive to the television model. So it's in the video space, it's in the gaming space. In one way, we look at it as part of the third wave of video programming brands, where the first wave was ABC, NBC, and CBS. They were radio. They came from radio. They went to broadcast technology. Then came the cable networks with MTV and HBO and Discovery and all those channels. And now you're seeing the emergence of video programming brands that are on the web, that come from really the internet. They're either built on YouTube, like Vevo and Machinima, or Hulu, Netflix. They're good examples of that as well. One of the things that's really interesting about the third wave that's different is we are instantly global. Out of our 200 million people, about 100 million of them are in North America, 100 million outside of North America. And huge numbers in the UK, Germany, France, Mexico, Brazil, et cetera. Also, we were born in the kind of on-demand era and in the video device era, right, with the iPhone and iPads and all those devices that are video enabled. So that was part of the big scale. And then we also embrace what we could call top-down programming and bottoms-up programming. A lot of the content generated on Machinima is generated by users, and some of it, like Mortal Kombat, is generated by traditional filmmaker that's financed by Warner Brothers. So from a programming model in the entertainment sense of the word, we sort of embrace both sides of the equation. And one of the things that's evolving is that a lot of those users are either incredibly good at a very specific thing, which creates huge engagement, like they might be great Call of Duty players as an example, or you're starting to see a new generation of filmmakers that are using this platform as a way to incubate their content and start creating shorts and different types of content to really drive new IP. And really our Mortal Kombat series that ended up being one of the most, we hear, the most successful web series of all time, really was a young filmmaker who loved Mortal Kombat, put a short up on YouTube. It did huge numbers. He convinced Warner Brothers to do a 90-minute, 10-episode show based on Mortal Kombat. They did that. Now he's directing the movie for Warner Brothers, and actually he's directing Mortal Kombat Season 2 in the meantime for us. So it's really becoming a really interesting ecosystem. Now to your question, do we monetize in the same way as CBS does or ESPN? No, we don't yet, right? I mean, it's still an emerging model. What we
should point out, though, that just so you guys know, with ESPN and MTV, the reason these are such big businesses is they have a dual revenue stream of both advertising fees and fees from the distributors, be it Comcast or DirecTV.
Yeah, so far we've been really focused on kind of the advertising business. I mean, what we do have is a lot bigger scale and the opportunity to create greater scale. It's one of the things I think most internet offerings do have, is the ability to get to huge numbers. You look at YouTube at 850 million people around the world. There's no cable company, no satellite company that has anywhere near those kinds of numbers. But on the other hand, if you look at how much Comcast actually makes with only 30 million or 25 million television subs, it's a huge amount of money. So that's changing. It's moving faster and faster in terms of how things monetize, but the monetization still isn't there yet. At the same level. I mean, it's clearly we're monetizing, but not at the same level.
Okay. And I mean, I want to get back to that Mortal Kombat model, but first, just in general with your programming mix, what is it about what Machinima does, the kind of content that you guys put together that is different than, would you say, the mainstream content? What kinds of creative are you looking for to stand out in a very cluttered marketplace?
Well, it's interesting. Every time the television market shifted, when cable came around, the existing order, the broadcasters did not understand the business model of the next one, right? I remember when I actually used to work in a cable company, and they said that, when Discovery Channel came around and said, well, we're going to do documentaries 24 hours a day, the broadcasters and the advertising business in Hollywood said, well, that's just ridiculous. You can't make money doing that, right? Or MTV, that was an even more ridiculous idea. Or 24-hour news or 24-hour sports. It's just not the way television was constructed in those days. And of course, the new medium and the new opportunity to have lots of channels as opposed to few kind of changed the dynamic. Now, what's interesting online is the two biggest categories by far on YouTube are music videos and gaming videos. And those two categories have not done traditionally well on television. MTV kicked music videos off the air, much, I'm sure, to their chagrin, and now Vivo is a monster, right? I mean, it has huge numbers, out there. And the same thing with Machinima, G4. I mean, these were networks that were not really driving big numbers by any stretch of the imagination, and yet it shows that really the audience was actually there. It's just a question of, does it need to be on demand? Does it need to be searchable? Does it need to be very, made up of a lot of segments that when you think about them on a global basis, oh yeah, there's a lot of Call of Duty fans and a lot of Halo fans and a lot of World of Warcraft fans, a lot of fans around gaming, that on a global basis it's a big number, and that actually a lot of gamers influence the culture in a way that goes beyond even the core to that we reach 200 million people. So the type of content then can be something that sometimes you could look at it and you'd say, that would never show up on a television network. It's a Call of Duty video that'll do 2 million views because someone's amazingly good at something, or it can be other types of content that you would look at it and say, well, that doesn't really work that that way, but in fact online it actually does, because there are enough people around the world that care obsessively about that game and are very interested in that particular video. So I think that's the differences, and also these players are also becoming broadcasters essentially. They're not only doing it with their own video, they're doing it on live streaming of games and competitions. That it is a different mindset than the traditional mindset of Hollywood, where you had to be a highly paid, represented by CAA type person to actually be in the game. You could be 15 years old, kick ass at a game, and actually be generating not only revenue for yourself, audience, and actually be good at it. And then you grow as a creative and start going into a lot of different directions. I mean, we had a guy who's one of our biggest partners named FPS Russia. He started off as doing gameplay, and over time, he realized that he's an incredible shot. He's an incredible, in real life, not just in gaming. He's a weapons guy. And he just loves blowing stuff up and doing things like this. And he's created this show and this huge following on YouTube. And he's kind of like a Borat type character. He plays this idea of being a Russian and what it means to be Russian. And he has created this huge following among himself, for himself. And so people are able to do this out of like these great passion points, which television's very difficult for television to actually get that narrow around a passion point.
So Machinima participates in this Russia FPS guy. How does that business work exactly?
Well, they're like it's kind of like the television model of affiliates. They're like affiliates. We have about 5,000 we call channel partners, and so they are anywhere from game players in certain games where they pay FIFA or Call of Duty or whatever the case might be, to people like FPS Russia and other types of characters as well.
So Machinima is a very broad mix when you think about, on the one end, you've got these affiliates, as you put it, that are really kind of, homegrown, user-generated phenomenons, to, on the other end, the halo, where you're doing high-end stuff that could just as easily be on TV or film, just happens to be digital. How does this mix shake out? Volume-wise, how much is it sort of on the user-generated side versus the low-end side, and how do you see that mix changing in the future?
I think we think about it still is it deeply rooted in gaming, right? So our sweet spot, even when we do episodic narrative, are things like Mortal Kombat and Halo and series that are based on games, or narratives that are very close to what the audience tends to care about. And when you look at, one of our biggest growing areas is tune-in for movies and television, and we can see our audience loves Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, and they watch Dark Knight and Prometheus and South Park and those kinds of things. So clearly there's content outside of gaming that gaming audiences love, and that's really where we think about it. But we're very hyper-focused, kind of the opposite of traditional media, or even traditional web, if you want to call it, where everyone tried to be a portal. You try to be AOL, Yahoo, MSN. They all look vanilla. And they're trying to be something for everyone, and we just think the next wave of it is like be hyper-targeted on an audience on a global basis. You can build a big audience, and then the content and the offerings and everything you do should be focused on that audience, as opposed for us to, and it's very binary for us. If we put Gossip Girl on our site, it would do nothing. No one would care. But if you put things up about, about Halo or Call of Duty or Walking Dead, it gets a lot of resonance.
That said, as much as we're making of the differences between sort of the mainstream TV and what you guys do at Machinima, it seems more and more, as I checked the site in recent months, the volume of content from the mainstream TV programmers in terms of marketing on your site is tremendous. And it almost blurs the line a little between this is an ad and this is a program. There's kind of integrations.
Right.
Is that sort of a rising piece of the pie for you guys?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk to marketers a lot about is what works on YouTube is original content, something that someone actually has done. A really good example that had nothing to do with Machinima was a site that I'm actually on YouTube that I'm an investor in is called Dance On, which is about dance, completely different category than what we do. When Black Swan came out, they were still a very young company, and they went to Fox Searchlight and said, would you give me can I put your trailer up for the movie? And of course they said, sure, you're a dance community. And then they went to them and said, could you give me a unique piece of content, like a complete dance? And they said, well, why would you want to do that? I said, well, because on YouTube, it'll do better than just like hype advertising. And so what happened is, even though they were a small company, the trailer did 250,000 views, and the scene from Black Swan did 2.5 million views. So one of the things that we talked about, even with Mortal Kombat was in effect a show, an episodic narrative, but there was also a game coming out, so you could think about it as marketing for the game. It did like 14, 15 times the views of their trailers. And so this idea that content is better marketing than advertising, that resonated with The Walking Dead. And when we did season 2, they actually, instead of creating trailers for season 2, they created 6 original episodes that were about the breakout day and used those as a way to market. So we think the content companies that do great content, if you're creating Homeland or Game of Thrones or whatever the case might be, you should think about this as not just like, let me put up a trailer, try to BS the audience into seeing my show. Rather, show them something compelling from what you have. You do make compelling content for our audience, so just let's show that.
So there's blurring of the boundaries on the marketing side in terms of the difference between mainstream and machinima, but you guys also play a bit in the mainstream space, in the sense that, from what I've known, machinima has tried to produce for television, and potentially we could see a studio like Warner Brothers or Paramount or whatnot start to produce programming for you. Is that something that we could see at some point?
Well, I mean, Mortal Kombat was financed by Warner Brothers. It was the digital distribution group. Yeah, look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, just like what's happened in cable, where people originally in cable thought, oh, that's public access, no one cares, the content financing businesses will have to, if they get engaged, it really accelerates the model. And as you know, when in basic cable in 2003, when the Shield came out, and all of a sudden basic cable, if you look at it back from 10 years ago, you see a crazy amount of shows on there that are shows that most of us are watching. If you just looked at the Emmys the other day, between Showtime and HBO and AMC, and a lot of them, any shows that we're still watching on television happen to come from there. That's partially because there was an ability for the studios that started really financing more expensive programming. And actually part of that's accelerating in some ways because of digital platforms, because Netflix is buying those episodic series faster than ever, and they're using companies like Machinima to do tune-in to drive bigger numbers than ever. So I think, for example, a lot of traditional television executives passed on The Walking Dead. They did not think that it would do what it did, or they missed Big Bang Theory. They just didn't think that, think about it, CBS is the most conservative network on the planet practically, and yet one of their hot shows is Big Bang Theory, which is about a bunch of scientist geeks, right, and which you would have never really thought about. So I think, the size of the culture is more than people really understand. But also, I think that these new digital platforms are helping drive and fuel a lot of this stuff.
When we talk also about sort of this traditional TV system, the pay TV model, very lucrative. You guys obviously trying to close the gap there. But is there a potential way we could see down the line where you guys even participate in that system? Could we see a Machinima TV channel? Could we see given the blurring of the lines between digital and traditional TV, is this something that you look at?
Yeah, I mean, we really focus on our network, right, which exists. But I do think that, I remember when I was working in cable, there was this whole discussion that the new generation did not know the difference between a cable network and a broadcast network. To them, it was just channel 11 versus channel 2, and did not really understand that. And when you were around, when cable first came around, you absolutely understood that difference. And I think what will happen is the next generation will not know the difference among any of this. They'll just think we were kind of odd, that we used to sit in our living rooms at very appointed times and watch television when they told us, and now we watch whatever, whether it's Machinima or Vivo. We're going to be on TV sets, we're on iPads, we're on tablets, we're on computers, we're on phones. So I think these networks will be on any device that makes sense. And certainly we'll be on TV sets through the connected television sets for sure.
Gotcha. Well, being here at a film festival is probably only natural. We also talk about, you've referenced the Mortal Kombat model, which was kind of interesting that actually grew into a real movie. As you look at the independent film space, is there a place, I'll ask you in two ways. Number one, for Machinima to ever get involved there, or even you as an individual investor, given you do things outside of Machinima as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think like in our case at Machinima, speaking about the company, we clearly want to do more of this kind of programming. And what we're seeing is more filmmakers that are basically, because they have the tools and they can do pretty cool looking things, way less expensively than you used to be able to. And you have the Red cameras and the Macintoshes and Final Cut Pro and all those kind of tools that allow you to do things. You can start to put those shorts that you make. Let's say you have an idea, you can make a short out of that idea. You can put it on YouTube. If it fits our audience, you can put it on, certainly on Machinima, and drive big numbers. And those big numbers begin to activate opportunities for you. So I do think that this model of, people used to spend years writing scripts and they'd run around Hollywood trying to get these things funded. And then there'd be people sitting around a room and someone would make a decision, is actually being influenced in a way by what's happening up here in the Valley and in generally what's happening on the internet, which is a more organic approach. If you think about it, I always use the example of Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg made it good enough for his buddies at Harvard, and then it was good enough for everyone at Harvard, and then it was good enough for college students, and then it was good enough for 800 million people. It's almost concentric circles of value, and in a way you can think about developing a movie that way. It can be a short that turns into a web series, that turns into a movie, or becomes other types of franchises. But just like all of us are living our lives more in public than ever before, young creative talent, not even young, just creative talent, can live their lives, and so can their stories. And those stories can be shorts that people engage with, and they can't wait to see more of it. And then Mortal Kombat was a series. Now our audience knows that there's going to be a Mortal Kombat 2. They're working on a movie. All of this stuff I think is really a great opportunity. And we've never had a video platform like YouTube before. 850 million people. You can put your video and drop. Now, yeah, you got to get people to see it. But one piece of the gatekeeping is gone. You can put your content up so people can actually see it. In the traditional system in Hollywood, you can't get your movie through the distribution system, or you can't get your television show on NBC without them saying yes. That's no longer a barrier to you. So you can now take it to the next step. And with these tools that are available and the ability to put those videos up, you can actually do it. So I do think we'll see a lot more of that. And look, major careers have been made. Neil Blomkamp, who directed District 9, he put up an original video based on Halo on YouTube. It did huge numbers. He was being selected by Peter Jackson to be the guy who's going to direct the Halo movie. It didn't happen. But now he's directing, then he ended up directing District 9. He had the hit for Comic-Con. The buzz of Comic-Con was really his movie that came out. Kevin Tantron is going to direct Mortal Kombat for Warner Brothers. I mean, so there's, this activity is really starting to happen, and I think the platforms are really there to really enable filmmakers to get to the next step.
So two different huge barriers come down: the cost of production and, distribution, period. I'm curious, for you at Machinima, does that become sort of a gateway to getting on your network as well? Do you call on people who want to submit to your network to just do it as opposed to looking at something on paper?
Well, we do it two ways. One is our channel partners, or some of them are hybrid filmmaker gamers, and so they'll put something up either in a game engine, or they'll put something up that's live action, that's related to the game. I mean, and then you start to see them, and some of them are startling, the results. You see, oh my God, how'd they do that? All these effects and stunts and all sorts of stuff that they're doing, and then that could evolve into a conversation, and then sometimes through the traditional model, people will pitch us an idea, but we don't do it, when we approach those ideas, we do not do it the way a typical studio does. we require, I mean, clearly there has to be a writer involved, but we require that there be a filmmaker, a director involved, and that a short get made that our audience would respond to. And if that happens, then we we do more. So it's really, we can't play the traditional Hollywood game of like getting writers to rewrite 15 times over and spend millions of dollars and that kind of thing. We want to see if that filmmaker's capable of making 10 minutes, 11 minutes, some element of short that'll engage our audience, and if that does, then you can move it. But remember, our audience is deeply rooted in gaming, so it's going to be action, horror, sci-fi, thriller, irreverent comedy. That doesn't mean if you want to do something that's a different genre than that, there aren't other pockets of large audience on YouTube that you could connect with.
All those genres that you just mentioned to me are also examples of young male-friendly content, which TV has notoriously had difficulty trying to embrace. Does that become a real competitive edge for Machinima? You're getting to a demo that others have trouble getting to?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I first started with Machinima, one of the things that was really pretty clear is that a lot of the audience loved movies and they loved games, but TV was kind of soft, or it was sort of, it wasn't really there. And, but really, in the last few years, that's changed. And I think it's changed mainly partially because, Netflix is buying the stuff, the economics are different. But all of a sudden, you started seeing, shows like Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and Spartacus and, these kinds of things starting to show up that were more in line with what the audience cared about. And so I think TV's now become part of the landscape, as well.
I soon want to go out to you guys. If you have questions, you could raise your hand and we'll get those answered. Just one more for me first is, for those in the audience that are sort of machinima.com newbies, what would you say are a few key pieces of content that you're particularly proud of, that you think are particularly emblematic of what your network does, that they should check out?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're a gamer, then there's some things like there's some great videos that were made by a lot of our partners. I think if you're a general audience, those may or may not make sense to you. But we had a series last year called Receiver, which is RCVR, and it's a kind of X-Files type of show, and it won Best Drama of the Year. Mortal Kombat, that live action, is called Legacy. We're told it's the most successful web series. So I think those are two good examples of something you could see, and that are more in the kind of traditional live action side, but there's lots of, literally we have hundreds of thousands of videos.
Cool. All right, so with some shows of hand, let's get some questions going. You, sir, in the middle.
I've actually two questions for you. The first is, how did you come up with the idea for Machinima? Did you see that there was this opportunity of people posting games out there, that there might be a chance to create a market, or did you have an idea about the channel first and then go out looking for people? And then the other thing is did you see that this could be a viable, profitable business at the time, or was it more just kind of passion and then it turned out that you actually could make some money doing it?
No, it's a good question. No, actually, Machinima existed before we got involved. The actual term was coined by a fellow named Hugh Hancock, who there was a group of early pioneers in Machinima that were filmmaker gamers that were trying to make films, right? Rooster Teeth is a company, for example, in Austin, Texas, that makes a series called Red versus Blue, and they were one of the early ones. It's kind of like an existentialist comedy, believe it or not, in Halo, right? Which is it's very, very well done. They're really good. But that was kind of the origins of that. And when I saw that and was introduced to it, I thought that was part of the equation, but that games were getting so good visually, and then YouTube was starting to really blow up, and that there was really a kind of, and digital tools were really getting better and better, and that there was really an opportunity for kind of a new popular cultural movement, the way MTV was in the 80s, that was really based on gamers. The gaming platforms were getting amazing. They're starting to influence movies, like 300 looked like a video game as opposed to the other way around, and even Bourne and the way that was shot, and a lot of kind of traditional filmmaking and culture was being influenced by this community, and so we thought there would be an opportunity to really create a new kind of MTV but really based on gaming. And I did think, I had been in cable, and we had always talked about the 500 channel world and 5,000 channel world, and we never really thought it was going to be on television. But the one thing that we didn't count on was, that something could grow that fast and be that global. And then the second thing that we didn't count on was the proliferation of video-enabled devices. So when you look at those two things happening at once, all of a sudden you see really just giant scale around some of these verticals. And that probably wouldn't have been predicted by people, let's say, in the traditional television business.
I was reading that Google took a pretty significant stake in your company. What does that mean for you? What does that enable you to do? What plans do they have, and do you have as a result of that?
Well, we did, our last round of financing was led by Google, and not Google Ventures. It was actually Google Corporate. It was very exciting for us, obviously. We think that we live in a world that's between kind of Southern California, Northern California. You know what I mean? It's sort of between Hollywood or traditional video entertainment, if we will, and technology is a big piece of it. Google's obviously one of the greatest companies on the planet, so it was a big deal for us that it was kind of a big endorsement for us. We were very excited about it.
Is there any specific plans that come out of that, or it's just general?
No, obviously Google owns YouTube, and and therefore, they can't really show any favoritism with us relative to other people that are on the platform. But I think it's showing the commitment, I think, that Google has to the video space, right? Which is really trying to understand what other things can we do, how video is going to move to these devices, and some of the ad formats that are evolving on YouTube, like TrueView, which is a performance-based, you only pay if people actually watch, is starting to get enormous traction on the platform, and we're seeing enormous growth in mobile. So there's a lot of those kinds of things. So I think it's really paying attention to the ecosystem and taking advantage of a giant opportunity, which video, around the world. The television business around the world is gigantic. So it's a big opportunity for them as well.
To piggyback a bit on that question, though, YouTube underwent a pretty significant shift this year in terms of how it presents original programming in a more traditional channel-like structure. Were you guys a part of that, and what have you seen as a result of that model?
Yeah, we were part of that as well, like for example, the Halo project is part of that on a channel we call Machinima Prime, and there are a number of channels that I think it's a really good thing. I think what's happened is you've sort of brought a lot of different creators to the ecosystem, some of which were traditional. Brian Robbins is an example, or Brian Beadle that came from Classic Sports Network. And so there have been some traditional people that have come to the platform, and then also people that were already on the platform. And it's just creating kind of like an ecosystem of different people trying different kinds of things. And I think everybody's like learning from each other and trying to grow the opportunity.
I'm just going to keep asking if you guys don't. So, all right, I'm going to keep hogging the time. Oh, no, there we go.
Hi. I was wondering, have you, as a company, been able to bridge the divide or do better with when it comes to the intersect of girls and gamers? They've always existed as a community, and have you done anything about it or done anything that targets it specifically?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and when we first started, I think our numbers were literally 99% won, right? It was because the way we actually started is sort of the opposite, again, that most media companies. We started with one game. We started with Halo, and we just looked at it and said, does the audience care about? How do we get that right? And then we moved to 2 or 3 of the shooter games and just moved out from there. And now it's up to 11 or 12% as female versus male. And there is something really interesting, when you look at things like, Hunger Games and Vampire Diaries, and there is kind of category that's emerging in a bigger and bigger way around kind of fantasy, and it's obviously more romantic oriented in many ways in the male genres, but there's something there that's going on, and that we've been talking a lot about it. But then girl gamers themselves, there are, you know, at MLG, there's some teams that are really growing, and so we're trying to figure out what that is. Now, some games have different mixes, right? I mean, you know, for example, World of Warcraft will have more females than, say, the multiplayer Call of Duty crowd, but the mix is changing. It has changed pretty significantly, 10 times over, you know, since we started, and we're trying to, you know, pay more attention to it. What I mean, though, is what I meant about the Gossip Girl side is what we won't do is go to outside the demo in clearly areas that gamers won't care about just to appeal to the demo. We still want to be very focused on kind of the gamer idea, if you will.
Are you starting to work with the source filmmaker development community? The source filmmaker development community? Do you know that open source software platform that's being developed?
No, well, they might be. I mean, we try. I mean, really, we are open to work with any kind of community that's interested in making film, and you know, it's interesting. You know, when people think about, are we like a television network, or are we like a movie studio, or are we like a movie distribution? You know, do people make movies for us? Do they make television episodic programming for us? And it's interesting because we're sort of, in a way, a little bit of both, because we are global. You know, the traditional television business is, you know, studio finances something for a television, like Warner Brothers owns Fringe, it licenses it to Fox, and then it tries to sell it around the world. And our model is we think about everything globally. We try to release everything we do on a global basis. So, and then, you know, Mortal Kombat's in 10 episodes, but it's really a 90-minute film. I mean, it's kind of one of these, I think there's kind of a hybrid model there. And then there's people working around with kind of choose your own adventure type films, and are there interactive type films, all sorts of different genres that I think will evolve. To me, it's the issue is the platform is really focused on an idea and a type of audience that cares about certain things. And then some of it will be linear, some of it will be non-linear, some of it will be, you know, movie length, shorts, all sorts of things around that. But we are interested in building franchises, meaning, you know, season after season, something happens. And we're doing Mortal Kombat 2, we're doing Receiver 2. You know, we're trying to get into that ability to be able to build bigger franchises for our audience.
Well, I'm going to jump in with another question.
Or
was there? Sorry. There you go.
Do you guys, totally lost my train of thought for a second. Come back to me in a second.
Okay. Another question over here.
I was wondering, you know, if I was reading about it the other day. I don't know if you were involved. That a lot of TV shows that had a very strong fan following that are no longer on the air, and there's no plans on reviving them. I was wondering if you had got in touch with those sort of filmmakers to do like mini-series, you know. Firefly is a big example. Don't know if you're doing anything in that space.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've been actually spending some time recently with some of the television studios, and there are a number of those things out there that there are, on a global basis, there's an audience for them. They got canceled for weird reasons, or they didn't work domestically or whatever, and some of the home entertainment executives believe that they could be significant to do it like as a special. I mean, think like Sarah Connor Chronicles, Heroes. You know, there's a number of those that are in our audience, right? That you could imagine sort of, you know, coming back from that perspective. And so I do think there's an opportunity there, again, because the dynamic would be different. It's not like we're trying to reach, you know, we're on Friday night, it's not a great night, and it's, you know, on a network, and maybe they're not getting enough numbers just in the US to make it worth it. But on a global basis, it could be a different model. And again, I think even a lot of the studios are trying to rethink that model themselves to see if there's an opportunity. Those are brands. You know, Heroes is a brand. Sarah Connor, you know, Terminator is a brand. You should be able to make that work somehow.
And so the role that you guys would play is being a platform for. Okay.
Yeah, it would be distribution, I guess.
Is there an interest from your community to engage with the actual content creators? I mean, I'm assuming there might be because it's a more intimate, kind of experience watching the content, since usually the creators are probably a smaller head count of people making the content, and it's a little bit more front page, like who made it, and if so, how do you guys kind of allow for that, or is that something you guys are exploring, or?
Yeah, well, it's interesting in a way because, people talk about independent film, but our audience is mostly driven by gigantic entertainment properties, right? Call of Duty is the most successful entertainment property in the history of entertainment. There's like nothing that comes close to the numbers that those guys generate. No movie, no TV show, no music has ever come close to that number. And also the movies that they obsess about are Dark Knight and Avatar and, Prometheus, these kinds of films. So there is this kind of kinship between those kinds of filmmakers and, the Ridley Scotts and Christopher Nolans and all of those. Now, some of those have come from the independent world, like Christopher Nolan. Memento was a stepping stone into that area. But one of the things that's actually become a conversation with some studios is what happened with Mortal Kombat, which is, hey, is this an interesting step between Christopher Nolan and having done Memento and Christopher Nolan doing Batman, right? Because there's this giant step that the studios have to make. McGee, when he got Terminator, all of these guys, when they get that first big Hollywood picture, it typically has come from something that they did before that was like a tenth of the budget, So the question is there an interim step there? And I think these kinds of projects where you're able to show off your wares, they still have effects and action and stunts and those kinds of things are important. But just to be clear, the core gaming audience is a core mass, they went to see Dark Knight in big numbers, right? It wasn't the small indie film that came out of Tribeca, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So it's really a mainstream, you could, I don't know if you call it mainstream audience, but it's a lot of the big titles in the movie business are allied with that kind of audience.
Yeah, my question applies to compassion, altruism, empathy. Do you feel there's some kind of responsibility to put some of these kinds of mechanics into games? And I come from the affective neuroscience area, so I'm interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, no, I think, look, games are, it's interesting to watch. I mean, people have talked about this, a lot of game developers have talked about this, but it's interesting to watch people, when they play games, they just jump in and they start doing things, like sort of maybe my generation would have tried to read the manual. They just open the game and start playing and figure it out as it goes along. It's almost much more like a scientific process. The question is, can you create something that engages the audience in a way that allows you to start making you think about certain kinds of choices that you're making? And I think you can see glimpses of that. Maybe, obviously you may not see glimpses of that in a game like Call of Duty, but you might see it in a game like Portal, or you might see it in other ways where, maybe strategy games or other types of games where you start to think about, well, what happened here, and there are some companies in the entertainment industry, as you probably know, that are really interested in how do we make mainstream entertainment that makes also people think about it. And there are, I would say there are a couple of two extreme examples would be like Solaris, which would be a very intellectual type of science fiction film, and Terminator on the other hand, right? But it's interesting because when you think about how Terminator gets into the language, into the lexicon, people talk about judgment days and computers taking over and singularity and those issues. It's another way to get at it. For this audience, I think you have to get at it in the context of an action story or something that's engaging, mostly young males. But I think that the domain that you play in and what you're trying to do, if you're trying to get people to think about the environment or think about other aspects that may impact them, you can put them in the story, like Fallout, for example, or other types of stories that exist in the gaming world that are about things that happen to the planet or things that happen to people, and then does that resonate, in certain ways. But I think it's a good point. I mean, it's a question of, it's the same problem you have in film, right? When if you're making a film that can kind of work on multiple levels, when you walk out of it, you have a sense of some of these ideas as well as you were quote unquote entertained. You know what I mean?
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I was just wondering, is Machinima interested in targeting, say, other languages or gaming cultures outside of the current ones, say like gaming cultures in Asia, China, Japan, or Korea?
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, we started off with really the core console gamers, right? Because that's the reason that was the case is that Halo specifically allowed people very easily to make videos out of the because in theater mode you could make videos, and they also had a lot of the shooter games had the highest visual quality for a while. But now that's you're seeing high visual quality in all sorts of games, and we're seeing kind of the core, mid-core games. Some of them are even showing up on the iPads, and they're coming from different cultures. And look, the history of Hollywood, in a way, the history of gaming is influenced by cultures from all over the world, right? And Girl with Dragon Tattoo is a movie that came out of Sweden, and a lot of the games that our gamers play here in the United States were influenced out of Asia and other places. So I think that and that's one of the great things about these new platforms online is that they are global, they are international, and they're starting to feed each other. This whole free-to-play on the core side that you're seeing games like Hawken and these new games come out, that's completely influenced by business models and approaches that were taken by Asia that people, the console guys said, oh, that'll never happen. But I don't know if you've been reading recently what Ubisoft and other companies are talking about. They're going to free-to-play in a big way. Call of Duty is going to be free to play in China. So these business models and these approaches are starting to really influence each other, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's really it really opens up the world of different cultures and opens up the different opportunities. And one thing that's happening in Machinima, which is really interesting, is there's a real interesting connection between episodic narrative and episodic gaming, right? And I do think that we will see emerge as maybe a new form of you're watching Walking Dead, and it's the end of the season, and then you could play the farm as a level, that kind of thing, right in game. Not like the game is made and comes out a year later, or they're completely disconnected. But we are seeing, because gaming publishers are understanding that narrative is driving a huge amount of engagement, right? So Hawken was a really interesting example, just to talk about that for a few minutes, as there are these young kids that are outside of LA that created a prototype for a game, and it's a mech shooter game, and they made a YouTube video out of it, put it up on YouTube, and got enormous traction. Mitch Lasky up here in Sand Hill Road, who's probably the best gaming investor, in Sand Hill Road, behind Riot and a bunch of these games. He tracked these guys down and made a game. Made a deal with them, and it's part of this company, Meteor. We are doing a lot of the marketing for them. It is a free-to-play, but core type of game, right? And it's interesting because it's sort of, and they're doing an episodic narrative storyline that actually Warner Brothers is financing to kind of be part of their overall marketing and engagement campaign. So these worlds of episodic narrative, gaming, play, are starting to merge in a really interesting way. And this Hawken game, I think, is going to be one of the ones where people will look at and say, wow, that was a milestone in kind of the next evolution in kind of core gaming.
What an interesting note to end on. How about a hand for Alan DeBevoise?
Oh, thank you.
Good to see you again.
See you again, yeah. Should be smacked.
We'll do it again next week.
Yeah, we'll do it next week.
Thanks, guys. Just leave him there. And then tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. we start the talk series with hackers, hacktivists.